You are listening to the Bail Post.
I can't believe we're on season 4 of the Bell Post. This is great. Thank you so much for checking in one more time as this time we talk about an issue that's been we've been touching on for several episodes of our podcast. We did an episode with Kim Ogg, the sitting DA of Harris County, and she kind of gave us information that we really didn't know before. It was talking about the Soros impact on electing DAs and the coalition of groups that they had set up to influence the DAs and set policy going forward. And so we have tried to get more information and find out more about what these groups were doing. And so our guest today is Eric Granof, who's Vice President of Corporate Communications, Chief Marketing Officer of the Expert Bail Network and AIA Surety. He did a presentation at the PBT, Professional Bondsmen of Texas annual meeting regarding the Soros effect on electing DAs and the impact he's bringing to their offices after they're elected. And he's written a paper entitled The Untold Story, Selling Out Public Safety One District Attorney at a Time. And it was the lead story of our newsletter for January. So Eric, welcome to our podcast. I know you've been a guest before, but welcome once again.
Thank you. It's great to be here again, as always.
So tell me, what kind of sourcing information did you find to support what you talked to us about at the annual meeting and in your article?
Well, it's interesting because when you and I talked way back when about taking a look at what was happening in these DA races and taking a look at funding sources and where the kind of strategic component of it came from. And, we talked about, the ultimate boogeyman, George Soros, as being involved in that. I thought it would be kind of a challenge to kind of go online and try to find this information because I figured it would be kind of hidden. They're doing this stuff in the shadows. And I think it was really shocking to find out that they're not really hiding this stuff, that they're doing it right out in the open. And so much so that, the amount of resources that I was able to find on this topic were really actually overwhelming. And that's why it took so long, and probably about 4 to 6 months of going through these materials and taking a look at what was happening and finding out there's even books written on the topic of these rogue prosecutors, as you can see from the book behind me. So there's a lot of information out there, and it really made it kind of both easy and difficult to kind of go through this and learn about this topic.
How did this all begin? That we get this idea, or these groups get this idea that we're going to try to influence criminal justice policy reform, bail reform by influencing district attorneys who are elected in the United States jurisdictions?
It's interesting is because it seemed like there's been an evolution of this kind of approach. Whereas the first one, at least the one that I found in the research that I did, it wasn't around bail, but it really happened around the death penalty. Mm-hmm. And it was this one attorney kind of figured out and approached Soros and asked for funding from him to try and see if they could, since they couldn't get voters to eliminate the death penalty in a state through the election process, or get legislators to get rid of it through the legislative process. They figured out that, well, if we could control the decision maker, which in the criminal justice system, surprisingly enough, I figured out it really wasn't the judge, it was the prosecutor, the district attorney in that local jurisdiction. If you could get that individual to have the same belief system that you did, or the value system that you did, and in this instance, it was being anti-death penalty, if you could get that person elected, then that person could, using something they call prosecutorial discretion, they could avoid prosecuting or decide not to prosecute death penalty cases. And so they put this to the test, and I believe it was in Louisiana was one of the states, and I believe Arkansas, I think those are the two states. They were able to actually pretty much eliminate it by getting these district attorneys elected. And the interesting thing about these district attorney races is that, unlike a lot of legislative races that we see, where millions and millions of dollars are spent on campaigns, these local jurisdictions, I think the majority of them, there's no money spent at all on a campaign because a lot of these people go unopposed when they try to get elected. I think the average cost, it was something like $700 or something like that, or like being the average cost that one of these DA races in a local jurisdiction would cost somebody. So they figured out I can drop $10,000 in a local race, get the guy that I want elected, and then he'll start doing what we believe in from our value system in terms of criminal justice policy. And I think that was the kind of the very beginning of it, but it really did start with the death penalty and not necessarily bail.
And don't you think that when they started this in earnest, I mean, they just didn't think, okay, we're going to throw money at somebody and they're going to do what we wanted to do. They had to go out and recruit like-minded people or people who were open to their suggestions. So, I mean, I like to say, you know, in the past, we've had many election cycles where the Democrats were promising the true believers that they would do things. And then as soon as the election was over, they wouldn't do it. They go back to the norm. And so the Democrat Party or one side of the electorate started voting in the true believers that then would do what had always been promised but never done.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the amount of influence that these people that get these people elected have is beyond anything I think I've ever seen. And it's not just, I think, having a common ideology. It is, you know, here's some tweets that you could send out. Here's a press release that you could put out. Here's some research that supports our belief system on this stuff and that really support all these actions that we're taking. And it really, at some point, didn't even matter if the research was correct or not. It was research that was then supported. And then, oh, here's some friendly media people that are go ahead and put this story out there for us, or do an interview with you, allow you to talk about this research study that we did, and or talk about the results of these programs around the country and how well they're working. And so, I mean, it really wasn't just influence from a here's some money, go get elected. It was here's a bunch of tools that you can use and we'll use together to get our message and our ideology out there and push our policies.
Well, you know, when I'm looking at, you know, a company trying to sell a new product, they come up with a sophisticated public relations campaign, and you could see several elements that kind of fall into what this group was doing. I mean, you know, if you have a new product, you're going to develop the product, then you're going to do research to say it's a great product, and then you're going to advocate for the product, and then you're going to have all these PR campaigns to sell it to the public. I mean, it seems like when at the height of this process that was working so well for these groups, that's really looks like what they were doing. I mean, they were recruiting people that were like-minded. Once they were elected, they kind of came up with the product of here's all the policies that we want you to implement. They're going to have forums to go to tell you what they want you to implement. Then they're going to have groups that research it and explains how doing these changes is going to help make people more safe. And then they have PR press releases for them to send out to the public to sell these changes to them, and that it's going to be okay for public safety.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting that you pick that up, because I think anytime you deal with politics or anytime you deal with kind of social issues, I think people underestimate the actual marketing that's involved in the whole communications process of that. I mean, there's, you know, in the marketing world, there's always this, you know, there's a perception versus reality, right? So there's the reality of what the world really is, and then there's the perception of what people perceive of that reality, right? So the challenge, or what you really want to do from a communications or marketing standpoint, is you want to control people's perception of a situation, especially in the political world, right? Because if you can show them that something that they're looking at means this, then they're more likely to want to have the solution that you're willing to give them. And I think that, you know, the marketing or the communications and the narrative that they've spun, or the storytelling that they talk about these things, it's very compelling, and I give them a lot of credit. I mean, and it's very emotional. I mean, that's one thing they can really do, is they hammer on the emotion, right? When they talk about people in jail, they don't talk about people in jail. They talk about people languishing away in cages right? How
Mm-hmm.
horrible does that sound? And listen, if I didn't know what I did about the bail industry, or understand the reality of how we really work, and that's not really true, I fall for that too, because I think the human beings have a caring component, and everyone doesn't want anyone languishing away in a cage or a concrete box. But
Well,
that's the story they spin, and they get the reaction that they want from it.
but
And
that's
it's
part
a
of it.
very strong part of their argument.
They're drafting language that is intended to be inflammatory and to
And
cut
it's
off
heavily
debate.
researched language where it's focus group tested. It's
Mhm.
so they know exactly when they say something, they know exactly the emotion that they're going to get from the general public when they do that.
I mean, I kind of take that language all the way back to this civil rights core group that was filing suits across the country because I did a debate with a representative from their office and we did a podcast about it. But I mean, it was very inflammatory language and we debated for an hour and it, at the end they couldn't respond. So all they could do is say cages and you're a racist. Cages and a racist, you're a racist. And so they use language that is intended to cut off debate if they cannot respond to the merits of your arguments. So you've got these things. So you've got these groups that give money, but when they started out and at the height of what they were doing, they were focusing on inner cities that were one party jurisdictions, really. I mean, if you were the Democrat candidate and you won the primary, you were going to be the elected district attorney. So they went to areas where they could throw money, which generally didn't have a lot, and they recruited candidates on one side of the political spectrum and easily won. And then that was the Democratic candidate. And they served large groups of people or large numbers of people because they were in the urban cities. And then, when we talked to Kim Ogg, she would say she told us, and we learned for the first time about these seminars they give, and they invite newly elected DAs to, and they give them it became a quid pro quo. We got you elected. Here are the policies that we want you to adopt as the newly elected DA.
It's really interesting, and it's very powerful kind of what they've done. I mean, they've taken an issue. I mean, look at George Floyd situation. They raised $35 million in a couple days after that incident with these bail funds. I mean, they took this horrible situation that happened and they politicized it into a fundraising mechanism to then perpetuate their ideology of people shouldn't be locked up in jail and let everybody out, and police are bad. And I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, when you talk about the funding, it's very powerful when you have a good message and an influential message that people will give money to do things that go completely against common sense. I mean, if you
But
really break it down, what that movement about with the whole bail reform movement is, it's to say we don't need to ever punish people because they realize what they've done is wrong, and so we just have to show them that we can give forgiveness, and they'll then suddenly have this aha moment and say, oh, you know what, breaking the law is bad, I won't do it again. And so we just have to be nicer to them, and then they'll be nicer to their communities. And that just doesn't fit common sense, but that's what they sold, and that's what they got people to donate money to, which then drives all this other stuff that we see with this money towards these organizations to then go out and try to change our criminal justice systems to align with that.
Well, I think their strategy also played off with what they had been doing for many election cycles. So in our history, 6 months before a national election, there would be some criminal justice issue, some incident that would happen, and then we would have protests where one side of the electorate was being told, you need to get mad. And when you get mad, you need to come out and vote in heavier numbers to support our candidate. And it worked for a while. And the narrative was you're being taken advantage of. You're being mistreated. So the narrative in our inner cities initially played right off of that. you're being taken advantage of, and we're going to change that. And we're going to change it because we don't need bail. People want to come to court. They want to resolve their cases. So we don't need bail. That's taking advantage of them. We've learned since that that's absolutely not true. People won't come to court without bail. But then the really crazy stuff is you're no longer going to seek long sentences. You're not going to seek enhancements on crime. So, and in the drug area, you're not going to seek enhancement on the amount of drugs that are found with them. So a drug dealer found with 30 pounds of cocaine or fentanyl is going to be treated as someone in possession of drugs. They're going to get 2 weeks instead of 30 years. Well, drug dealers will see that as the cost of doing business instead of, okay, so we lose all deterrent effect. And I don't even know where the thought was that these policies were good, but they thought they were.
But here's the scary thing that, that you don't anticipate when you're doing that, right? Is that when you move so far in that one direction, where you go so soft on crime, the thing you have to fear is the knee-jerk reaction to fix it all, right? And where you go by, we're going to let everyone out of jail for free, but now the only solution we must have is that we got to lock everybody up. And the problem is both solutions are wrong. Okay. And you need that middle ground. I mean, there's a reason that we don't lock everybody up in this country just because they're accused of a crime or we think that they're bad. There's a reason we don't let everybody out in this country because we think that they've been, arrested for the wrong. There's the middle ground, right? You are innocent until proven guilty in this country, but at the same time, there's probable cause. So there's a balance point. That's why we always talk about the justice, right? She's got a scale. You need to find that middle point. How do you release people so you can give them their day in court and give them their innocence until they can prove that they're not, until the charge is proved against them, or that they're guilty. And then you need to also protect the public by keeping those super dangerous locked up and holding them accountable. So there really is that middle point that as a country, we keep kind of swinging this pendulum back and forth over that middle point. And what we do as a living in the bail industry is we occupy that middle point. We ensure that people show up for court. We ensure people are held accountable in the most effective way that there is.
Well, I want to highlight what you said about the two ends of the spectrum not being workable. So when you release everybody, you hold nobody accountable, then crime goes up. The public will not stand for crime going up. But when you go to the other end of the spectrum and you hold everybody, like, the federal system, pretrial holds about 75% of the people arrested. So you've got a 75% chance you're going to be held. And these states who are trying pretrial detention more and more, I mean, there's some new statistics from Maryland that have just come out, and they've kind of gone to an emphasis of pretrial detention for the violent people. Well, that means more and more people will be held over time. And so they're now at over 60% of people that are being arrested are being held pretrial. Well, the problem with that, when you get to that end of the spectrum, is the public can't afford and will not pay for that. And so you have to find a middle ground. And the problem that we're having right now is on the middle ground. In Harris County, okay, you can say even if you want to say they're doing the middle ground, they're not holding anybody accountable. So that's what's pushing them further to the left. They just keep releasing them. And so if you would do a middle ground where you give people a chance with a bond, and if they screw it up, if they violate, if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, then accountability should step in and then hold them until their case can be resolved. That's the whole concept of bail. I mean, I know people talk about this presumption of innocence, but bail isn't about innocence or guilt. It's what assurance are you going to give to the court that you're going to come and answer the charges, but also what assurance are you going to give the court that you're not going to be a problem to public safety in the meantime? So once you show that you're going to be a problem for public safety, well, then you can't be released on bail. And the problem is, we know from other examples, like, the Sanchez versus Alabama case, that if you implement an element of accountability, then the criminals or the people accused of crimes say, hey, I have to change the way I'm acting because otherwise I will be held accountable. So we know what to do to get crime to come down. It's just we're in this political period where in these inner cities they refuse to implement accountability, and that's what's pushing the legislatures, the people that are standing against it to say we need to have more preventative detention. And they don't. I mean, what the people pushing these crazy things in the inner cities don't realize is they're the ones that are pushing the pendulum to the far right. And it's because they won't recognize that what they're doing is failing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I know we're here to talk about a lot of this influence that these money has in DA races and stuff like that. But what you just said kind of really it resonated with me, because I think when people don't see about the bail industry is the social component, right? When we talk about like all these social programs, what are they talking about? They're talking about bringing people into the community to oversee someone. They don't need a bond. These people are going to go watch them. We don't need to send a police officer to that house when there's a domestic dispute. We're going to send a social worker because and I get why you could think that way,
No.
because there's a component of the how the community always ends up solving things together. And I went to a conference once, and in that conference they were talking about drug addiction and getting people off drugs. And they had done programs where it was an individual going to a drug rehab, and then it was an individual in a group setting with their family members.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at the effectiveness of that, and the people that were in the group setting, their ability to get off drugs was substantially higher than the people that tried to do it individually. But that's what bail is. Bail is the group structure. It's the family. It's the people that care, the people that are involved in this person's life, trying to get them to get better, making sure they show up for court, that they're held accountable, that they're doing the things they should be doing. And to me, that's what makes what we do really good. And I think that even it's like these social programs are not capable of doing that at the level that we have because we're involved with the family and the financial component. But I can see what they're doing as trying to say, well, they do this, how can we do it from our standpoint? But it just fails miserably for them.
Well, I want to kind of move on to the next component. You know, you've got the component that funds these elections. They've identified candidates, they give them money, they get them elected. Then you have these other groups, second set of groups that invite them to forums and give them out the policies that they want them to adopt. But then, and it's really become a quid pro quo situation, according to Kim Ogg. We got you elected, so here's what we expect from you. And, you know, Kim Ogg finally got to the point where she said, I don't believe this. This is creating problems. And so what did they do? They said, you're no longer invited. You're not liberal enough. And so in her next election, they get funded by $4 million, $3 to $4 million, an opponent in the primary, and she was defeated. But the next group is a group that does, you know, of a coalition of groups that do research and issues reports that essentially say this criminal justice reform or these bail reform policies will not increase crime. And it just seems like to me, when you look at it looks like they're cooking the books to get a result, and it's not true research.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you actually, it's like, it's me quoting myself and saying that makes it a fact, right? It's like, what? I mean, you look at these groups that come out with these research reports, and then if you actually, first off, I think there's an expectation, at least from their standpoint, that no one's really going to read these anyway. All they have to do is just basically say, here's a summary sheet that says that this thing is right. No one's really going to read through the research. Well, what we do here is we actually read through the research, right? And so what you'll see in a lot of these reports, they'll make these claims, but then you actually read the report, and it doesn't say what they say it says. And then if you begin to look at their references and their sources, it's just other groups that are funded by the same people that are funding that research center. And it's quotes from activist organizations that are out there pushing a narrative and pushing stuff. And it's like, well, how does that make it fact when you get two people without any basis for what they're claiming are just saying the same thing? And because they're saying the same thing, they use that as a source and claim it to be fact. So I think these studies have really muddied the water in terms of what you can believe and what you can't. I mean, you have Harris County, for example. We know they came out with all these great numbers, how great the system was working. You can let people out for free. And so what happens? Well, you get the Sheriff's Association takes a look at the actual jail numbers, the actual numbers of people that were showing up for court. And it wasn't that 5% of people were failing to appear. It was 80% of people were failing to appear when you really looked at the numbers. So you really have to question a lot of the stuff that you read out there that's driving this criminal justice narrative now, because a lot of this research is just, it's not real research. It's research done to get to a predetermined result.
Yeah. Well, I think there was two things that have happened that really confirm that for me. And one of them is, the monitor's reports that are filed every 6 months under the O'Donnell versus Harris County consent decree, which the case was reversed by the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit ultimately ruled it should have never been filed in federal court. And Harris County, because of a settlement and because of the politics, is still following it. But I mean, the initial reports were saying, oh, the failure to appear rate's like 20%. I mean, and then, like you mentioned, the police association came out with a report, and then, Harris County courtwatch.com came out with 2 years worth of data and saying that on cases governed by this consent decree, there's an 80% failure to appear rate on average. And so what did the monitor, how did they respond to that? Well, because, it was from data that the consent decree required to be set up. Well, then they said, well, okay, that data is not really is not valid, and you can't use it to interpret it. And then they said, well, we really don't know what the failure to appear rate is. And then the second thing is, these groups have relied upon the FBI statistics for years to say, and in addition to what we found, the FBI statistics say that crime is going down. And so that trumps everything, because, we all rely upon the FBI statistics. And we know
use that word Trump because he's the one that on national television during the debate pointed out that those numbers were wrong.
Yes, he did.
What's not what he was seeing around the country. It's not what he was seeing in the reports that he was reading from individual jurisdictions. And it didn't match up with the victims' research. And that ended up being the research report that came out, National Victims Crime Report.
Survey. Yeah, it's
survey, and that opened everyone's eyes to relook at the federal data on crime. And what they have?
It's like
they found out that it was wrong.
We might as well just call it the Trump impact, or the Trump effect, because Trump says it, and initially everybody says it's a lie, and then suddenly it becomes the truth. I mean, there's so many examples of that. But I mean, Trump says that, and suddenly there's a focus on it, and then October, a month before the election, someone discovers that the FBI has quietly amended their statistics and shows that crime has gone up. And so that completely destroys any narrative from any of these groups that relied upon it. And so what happens? One of these groups issues a report the very next week. And what's really the conclusion? Again, splitting hairs, get to an end. But now the conclusion is, well, bail reform and criminal justice reform is not the cause of increasing crime. So
they blame a hurricane, they blame COVID, they blame. I mean, listen, I mean, when you're fighting the ideological fight like that, you need everything you can. And if you control the research and you can control the media, it makes it real easy to spread misinformation about data that supports your efforts. And the problem is, when you deal with something like criminal justice, it's really hard to ignore the crime that's right in front of your face. It's really hard to ignore the homeless people living on the streets in California when billions of dollars are going to fix that problem, and they say it's not a problem anymore, but you can still see it. So a lot of the challenges of these efforts to manipulate the data, manipulate the information, manipulate the media's reporting of the data to then drive policy is that, unfortunately, you're dealt with the hard reality of the world, which is look right in front of you and see what's really there, and don't necessarily believe what you're hearing.
Well, so we've talked about the groups that identify candidates, fund the candidates. We talked about the groups that then held forums and tell them what they're going to do. We've talked about groups that then come in with research to support what they want them to do. And, the last coalition of groups is really the ones that come in and give them like a PR campaign to justify and sell that to their public. I mean, you've talked about how you can see different DAs that were supported by these groups all issuing the same press release.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not the same press releases. It'd be the same tweets. It'd be the same social media posts. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, because this is the job. Is everyone, we're on the same page. We're all going to send out the same message, the same narrative, and because when people hear it over and over and over again from different sources, they believe it. I mean, that's how you create. That's how you create a reality that's or drive perception that then creates the reality for those people. And no matter what they might see in front of them, they'll believe that, oh, it's working, and it's a very powerful thing to do. And it's really driven, like we started at the beginning of the conversation, when you have enough money and you can invest in these groups, you can buy these groups, you can create these groups, and then these groups can create these materials, and you can get into an elected office, and you're willing to follow and toe the line and spread the narrative, and then you have the media that's out there supporting it, and I mean, you can see how powerful it really becomes to fight. And we've seen that in our industry, and thank goodness for the reality of the situation is that crime has gotten bad, and it's due to nothing else than these really bad policies.
I mean, we never wish somebody to be a victim of crime. And the sadness or the real tragedy here is the policies have obviously not worked and have obviously not worked for a number of years. But the people pushing them, there's no compromise. You will continue to push on, even as they saw DAs who were elected got removed from office, either by the governor or by the electorate on a recall election because of the policies that we're following, or like Gascon got defeated in the most recent election by 20-something points. He was the subject of at least one, maybe two recall petitions, and if they had not, I believe, played politics with the signatures, he would have been removed a year before. And so it made it even worse because of the policies. I mean, the policies that these people were pushing led to decriminalization of theft in California below $950. And you think, oh, that's limited to California. No, the DA in Dallas County, when he was first elected, said, I'm going to do the same thing. I think he made it 750. And it was such a fiasco. Very quickly, he said, no, we're not going to do that. We're changing that. We're going to go back to the way we were. But California never changed it back. They had to change the statute. They had to give the DA no choice. Then they had to defeat the DA because they didn't trust that he would enforce the law.
But in California, that Prop 47 was designed that way. It could only be changed by a vote of the people, by the statutes getting changed. So the people had to change that, and it was designed that way because they know how difficult it is to get that to happen. So
yeah, but the Prop 47 originally only changed some felonies to misdemeanors, and the sell job on that was we're going to make it so that these people can find jobs. They're still going to have to answer for their crimes because they're misdemeanors. And then once that happened, then Gascon and other DAs in the urban areas that were elected by these groups came in and said, we're no longer going to prosecute the crimes because they're now misdemeanors. And that's when it became a problem. I mean, the problem I have with Prop 47 is it was supported by, the right and the left, and the right group should have foresaw what was going to happen. They should have looked through this and said this.
The problem I have with Prop 47 was that how it was sold to the public, and ultimately it was the public that voted it in, and it was sold as a Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. Okay.
Yes.
People didn't read into the details of all these different things that it was going to do. No matter what they heard out there, was, that we talk about marketing and branding at the beginning of this, right? Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. I don't know anything about the policy. I see that on the ballot. Why wouldn't I vote for that? I want safe neighborhoods and schools. So I think a large chunk of the reason that passed was because people had no idea what they were voting for. Now, which even makes what the elected officials, in terms of pushing that, decriminalizing all this stuff, shame on them, because what they unleashed on the citizens of California and the communities in California, that's criminal. And thank God people came to their senses and they voted Prop 36 in there and got rid of, rolled back a lot of 47, and they got Nathan Hockman in there to replace Gascon. But, we talk a lot about this, in all this time over the last probably 7-8 years, there's been about 126 of these DAs that have been elected into office. These DAs that are soft on crime, that agree to not prosecute certain crimes, that are using this prosecutorial discretion in a way that really it wasn't meant to be used. And like we said, people are waking up. And I think in the last election, I think there were 21 district attorneys that were voted out that were soft on crime district attorneys. But there were still, I think, 23 that were reelected. So it was a little bit higher on those that actually still won. So we still have this issue, and it's going to be probably for the next few years until people really wake up to what's going on. I mean, there's still some cities that have these DAs that are moving forward with a lot of these policies that are proven to not work, and yet they still keep voting these guys back in.
Well, but even more important, the ones that lost, the people who beat them were law and order district attorneys,
Yeah.
even if they were running as an independent or if they were running as a Democrat, the people that they replaced were law and order candidates.
Yeah.
And so
You know,
hopefully, so we'll see a lot of change. And then when you see, we've got a new president that's come into office, and he's already classified gangs as terrorist groups in our inner cities, and so he's making a push to get rid of gangs in the inner cities. If he does that alone, then that will change the face of this issue
yeah.
uh, for probably multiple election cycles. And I think part of, I don't want to give any advertisement to MSNBC, but I was just checking in to see how they were doing since the election. And I saw that they had a panel and they were talking about how to get over the depression of Trump winning. And I loved it. I loved it. I mean, it's so polarized. We can't talk about fighting crime. I mean, if you're a Democrat right now and you watch MSNBC, CNN, then you actually think that the politically correct thing is to not fight crime. I think one of the lessons of this election is that the Democrat Party was sold a bill of goods by these same groups. They thought that the statistics and the reports that these groups were giving out and all of these policies that they were saying we could do and it wouldn't make crime any worse, they bought into that, and they didn't realize it was a PR campaign. And we can talk about why, but it was not true. It was cooking the books from the very beginning.
Well, I mean, and I think it comes down to, I think it's a macro, the national level, and what happened this last election is the macro scale of what we're seeing at the local level. And Trump talks about it in one way, but when you're at the local level, it's really seeing that I'm following the law every day. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. These people aren't, and they're not being punished. Or this group isn't being punished in the same way that another group's being. It's like, well, that's not how we're supposed to. So as someone that follows the rules and pays your taxes and expects certain things in return, like public safety, in making sure all my utilities are working, or that there's water in my fire hydrants, or whatever that is, that we saw that people were waking up to, this isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. We're paying taxes. I should be benefiting from the taxes that I pay in the way that I expect. And whether it's that I don't walk into a store and I see people stealing stuff, or everything's not locked up in the store, and it's now a super inconvenience to ever go out and shop because you never know what's going to happen. Or it takes forever to get someone to come unlock a cabinet for you to get, some aspirin. So I think that this micro scale of what we've seen happen through this whole criminal justice effort and the DA effort, and all this money that's been pumped into these activist groups and this research that we've all talked about, I think it finally got to the point where people just were done with it. What about me is what it was coming down to. What about all of us that follow the rules? And I think that, that translated up into the macro level where everyone was trying to say, well, what about us? We do more than any other people, and we're just not getting the benefits that we should be getting from this.
We can talk a moment about, what was the motive for all this? I mean, why would they do this? And I like to say this is a coalition that pushed these policies. And part of the coalition is, the true believers. They think that we shouldn't have criminal laws, that we're just taking advantage of the poor, and we're taking advantage of minorities. And then we have parts of the coalition that are compassionate. They want to give people second chances. And, as we feel more safe, then the coalition changes. We had this in the 60s where people felt more safe. So they were willing to be more compassionate, more forgiving in our criminal laws. And so we changed the laws, and crime started going up. And then we had the same backlash. And we have, the true believers refused to negotiate, refused to even address the changes because we're not going to do that. And we ended up with the backlash that eventually was part of the reasons why Reagan was elected with his war on drugs. And so you're seeing this again right now. You couple the crime issue with immigration, because I think the immigration issue is hand in hand the same policy. It's the result of the same policy initiatives. Uh, and so people want to feel compassionate. They want to feel, um, they want to give people second chances, but you get so many people in our country that, like you hear Mayor Eric Adams talking about they're spending $6 billion and they can't afford that on housing people. And it's just the reality. And he's told, well, you don't need to complain about it because you need to be a good Democrat. Well, okay, that doesn't make sense. I mean, and so I've always thought that part of the reason why we have this coalition is we want to decrease all of the dollars being spent on law enforcement because that's the biggest item in the county, and we want to move some of that to social programs. But then the other part is you move in so many new people, and there's not enough money on social programs. And so it just creates chaos. That's why I've always said this is not sustainable, because the public will not allow chaos to continue. They will absolutely demand public safety.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I feel like, and just like on any issue, you're going to have those far on one side and then those far on the other. And it's this middle group that determines really where the boat ends up going anyway. So how much, and listen, people are compassionate, especially people in this country. I think people are very, very compassionate. And if you can get into that, and if you can really communicate that and touch people in that way, I think they're going to vote your way. And I think they've done a really good job in getting the general public to say, oh, jails are bad and all this stuff. We should give people a chance. But at the same time, I think we're also very smart person that we don't want to be taken advantage of. And when we see that start happening, we shift the other way. And it's interesting to me is because when you're talking about public safety and you're talking about criminal justice, there's a set of metrics that I think are good metrics to determine how safe you are as a community. In bail, our metric is, do you show up for court, right? And we do a very good job because of the nature of how we operate. But what's happened in this whole discussion, and what a lot of these research studies we talked about and the money that funds these research, is they don't have a good metric. What they focus on is how many people are in your jail.
And what's their racial
makeup? If there's too many people in your jail, well, that's bad. So we need to empty the jail. And it's like, well, hold on a second. I think there's a few more questions we want to ask, because emptying the jail, if it's a public safety thing you're talking about, I'm pretty sure that emptying a jail doesn't increase public safety. If it's people that are in jail and they're wrongly accused, well, okay, well, that's a different issue. So the metrics that have been used to push this agenda have been metrics that just have made no sense to me. It's like, if you don't want if your metric is, your goal is to empty the jails, then just open the door and let everybody out. You don't have to go through this whole process of paying all this money to elect someone and do a fake research. Just let everybody out of jail, but no one wants that. So
wait. That's a really good point.
What are the best metrics that keep us all safe?
But that's a good point. We're no longer using the metrics that we teach in colleges under our criminology classes on how to fight crime. We no longer, these groups are not using those as the metrics for how do we fight crime. They're coming up with their own. It's these new things, and they're saying, oh, this works. And they're saying, don't believe what so-and-so is saying because they're law enforcement and you can't believe them, when law enforcement always has the best statistics on crime because they're the ones that maintain them.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what you do is you call someone a racist and they say, I'm not a racist. And what's your response? That's exactly what a racist would say. So there's a way to pin people into anything that they say can never be right. But there's also side is very good at doing that to law enforcement, and basically it makes it very hard for law enforcement to defend themselves.
But there's also another group, another part of the coalition, I think, that just wants chaos. They don't think we should have criminal laws at all. They want to decriminalize most crimes, and they don't want anybody to be held in jail. And you can look at Portland and Oregon, where they decriminalized all all bad drugs for a period of time, and you're saying, oh, this is going to be better. People are going to seek treatment, and nobody, I mean, it was less than 0.01% that people would go into treatment without the hammer of the criminal justice system. And so it got so bad that they let those laws lapse or go back into effect because the statute had a period of time where it would expire. And so it was like an experiment. And there was no appetite to renew them, and so they've allowed those criminal laws to come back into effect, so they can have the hammer of pushing people to go to rehab or go to jail. I mean, it's kind of like we're rediscovering this concept that we teach in criminology classes. If someone can't be reformed, then the way you protect the public is by isolating them away from the public, which is what a jail is or a prison.
Yeah, and if you want to deter crime, I mean, it's.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've talked about it. I mean, the American Male Coalition and Jeff Clayton, he's talked about this statistic all the time. I think there's two things that prevent crime more than anything, and it's the swiftness of the punishment and the extent of the punishment. Those are the two things. How fast and how hard the punishment is what prevents people from committing crime. And I think that is, we've gotten away from that in a lot of places where people know there is no swiftness to the process and they know there is no punishment for what they do wrong. So what do you think is going to happen? It's going to get out of control. And that's what we've seen happen over the last probably 5-6 years.
I also argue that in our urban cities, especially, we have this small group of people. So it's like a city within a city. And they're the ones that are committing 60, 70% of the crime. And they're just recidivists that do over and over. And when you remove all accountability, so we're not going to hold you as long as you stay within these crime parameters, then you're always going to get released. And so there's this other group that live in the gray area between the crime city and the bigger city, and they're always looking at what's going on between the two cities. And when you take away accountability, there's some of them that go, well, I'm joining the crime city because I can see benefits to me and I don't have any exposure. But when there's accountability, those same people are going, I'm not going to prison. I'm not going to jail. I'm going to do the straight and narrow. And what we don't realize is the policies in our urban cities that are being pushed by these groups are pushing more people to decide to live within the crime city, in the city within a city, because there's no accountability.
All these policies are being done in the name of helping those communities.
Yes.
Those communities that are less served, those minority communities. And what happens? Exactly what you just said. The crime increases in those areas. All the people that you let out of jail because you're trying to help that community, those people go back to those communities and commit crime. And that's the one thing where I think has finally opened up everyone's eyes to this isn't helping us in any way. And we were promised all these things, and okay, you've told me if I commit a crime, I'm not going to get put in jail anymore. Well, you know what? I don't want that. I want people put in jail for crimes. I want my community to be safe at night. I want that promise. And I think that people are waking up to that, and we're going to hopefully see more policies in those directions moving forward.
Well, I think time has also shown that these policies, in the way they're sold to help those communities, are actually hurting those communities more than they are even the general public, because though crime goes up quicker in our minority communities, and so as crime goes up, it goes up much faster there, and the criminals themselves are being hurt more because they see it as a green light to commit more and more crime, and so they get more daring, and their criminal history gets longer, and so when they finally have to pay the piper, they're looking at longer sentences in the prison. So it's hurting both groups that they're intending to help, and I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this huge backlash as a result of these policies.
I agree.
Well, how do we keep this from happening again? I mean, we still have work to do. We have to stamp out the rest of these DAs who are pushing these policies. But how do we prevent this in the future?
I mean, geez, that's a great question, Ken. I'm not sure if anyone's capable of answering it. I mean, I'd say, okay, let's not repeat the mistakes of the past, right? Well, that never seems to happen in our world. So I just think we have to continue to look at what works and what doesn't. And I think we have to be in some instances, maybe a little less politically correct about things in order to have effective policy. And I think what we'll find out is it's not about whether something's politically correct or not. It's whether people feel. I mean, listen, human beings are pretty simple. At the end of the day, we want to be safe at night with our families. We want to have access to the things that allow us to live our lives in a comfortable, enjoyable way. And I think that as we've experienced a lot of these things that have done the opposite of what we really desire as human beings, I think we'll move towards more finding more ways that we can do these things in a responsible way. Because I mean, you got to learn lessons from going too far to one side and letting everyone out of jail. And we can't make the mistake now in this next couple of years of going the way of the other way and locking everybody up. We've got to be able to find a middle ground because everyone, the majority of people they want that middle ground. They want to be safe at night, and they want people that commit crimes or accused of crimes. They want them to be held responsible so that they don't do it again. And I think we just as a society got to find our way there.
I think the first point I would make is I've always said that what was happening was not sustainable. So I think this election will have maybe a self-curing impact because historically both national parties have been law and order. I mean, there's been, we went through the same thing in the 60s, but by and large, both parties were law and order. And I think there will be one of the impacts of this election is it will impact one party, and they will suddenly discover that they are a law and order party as well. The problem that we have is we should have had this backlash 2 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. And the reason why we didn't partly was because of the pandemic, partly because of the abortion issue was overcoming this issue, but also partly because we had candidates who then suddenly discovered, well, I need to appear to be law and order even when I'm not. And so it's lip service. So that party is going to have problems going forward because they're going to be susceptible to the argument of that's what you said 2 years ago. That's what you said 4 years ago. And you weren't. It was just a lie to get in office. I mean, look at Biden. Biden ran for president saying, I'm going to be a moderate, but he governed as an ultra liberal. And they're going to suffer the consequences of that I think for a couple of election cycles. How can you believe anyone who says they're a moderate? And right now, I don't think they could even nominate a moderate. They're going to nominate an ultra liberal who may then do what Kamala did, is turn into a chameleon, 6 weeks before the election and say, oh, I'm changing all these policies. I'm changing all these policies. That's who I really am. Wink, wink, nod, nod. The public's not going to believe that anymore.
Yeah, I think we just want honesty. We want to have people say things that then we then see the actions that follow that up. We want. I think we've gotten to this point now where there's so much money in the system that can drive research that isn't true, that can drive organizations that are not for the benefit of the larger groups, but really one tiny little group of society, and where things aren't done for the benefit of everybody. And I think that people want someone, and you know what? If that person has to give them bad news, I think they're willing to take the bad news, but they just want someone to be honest because all these people are telling us all these things for all these years that just aren't true to get elected. And I think people are sick and tired of that. And I think maybe honesty is making a comeback where you might not like how somebody says something or what they say, but you know what? They're telling you the truth. And sometimes, that's the best medicine for the situation. And I think we need to start waking up for that. And I think both sides of the political spectrum are seeing that happen too. And maybe it'll make a change.
I do agree with that. I think we need to get less politics into our criminal justice system. And maybe that's difficult to do because there's always politics involved in our DA races. I mean, there are politicians. But we need to get the level of politics that is permeating the system where these groups are setting forums and seminars and they're demanding that, we got you elected, so this is what you're going to do. And they're electing people that actually say yes to that. And I don't know how we do that. I mean, we could have the other end of the spectrum do their groups and then do their policies. But when you do that, then I think the public doesn't believe anybody. And so we need to go back to law and order, rely upon our police associations when they say this is who we need as a DA. I think we need to rely upon these things.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll even go a step further. I'll disagree with you a little bit. So I don't want the DA to be a political position. I don't care if they're elected or not. The DA has a simple job. It's like uphold the laws of the state or the jurisdiction and the state constitution and the laws and the Constitution of the United States. I mean, it's a well-defined job, and I think they need to just get back to doing that and stop. You shouldn't be left. You shouldn't be right. You follow the law, and I think that's one position where I think we need politics a lot less in than we do now.
But I think the backlash has just barely begun on the crime issue. And the reason why is because for a period of time we had some suppression of news. So we weren't, so the normal news is pushing the DA to right his position. And we had a period of time where that was being prevented. And as a result, those policies went even further. And then you have the backlash from the public, which was disregarded because it was downplayed because we have politicians being told to be a good Democrat. You need to just do this. And then you've got good examples of that where the NAACP in Oakland came out with a press release attacking their local elected officials saying, we need a state of emergency on crime. And the DA attacked them saying, you're just repeating. It's really sad that the NAACP is repeating Republican talking points. So it's not a real issue. It's a Republican talking point. And that muted it. It made it worse so they were the things that are built into the system that self-right it were prevented from doing their job. And so I would think of it like, those people who were sticking their necks out stuck their neck out even further as a result. And so now that the chopping has begun, the neck is stuck out so far that there's going to be a substantial backlash as the system rights itself. And we realize this could have been done 2 years ago. This could have been done 4 years ago, but it wasn't because we were being lied to.
No.
Okay, well, we still have work to do now that we've uncovered all these things, and we now have all these politicians to address. And you can see the impact of this, though. We have a Soros-supported DA elected in Harris County. He defeated another previous Soros-supported DA.
You have a Congressional Medal of Freedom prosecutor elected in Harris County now.
But he only won by 1 point. If the Republicans had spent any money on the race, the Republican would have won. So, and there were a lot of judges who had contested races that were defeated. So, I think you can see that that's having an impact on him. He is muting his positions from the start. Now, he may come back and do what he's been told to do, but you can already see he's muting the positions he said he was going to take. And I think it's a result of the reality of the election, the reality of what happened to the judges, and the reality of what's on the ground. These policies have not worked, and that's destroying our communities. And so we have to, I mean, if they don't work, we don't do them. That's just the way America works. And if we're not going to self-right doing that, there's a reason why we're not, and that won't last for long. And it's blown up, and we'll see how it continues to blow up on in their faces.
Yep.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about this issue. Thanks for looking at it. Thanks for researching it. Thanks for finding all these materials. Thanks for doing our presentation at our annual meeting and writing the article that was in our newsletter.
No, as always, it's my pleasure. I enjoy it all, and it was great talking with you again, Ken.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you for listening, and come back for the next episode of The Bell Post.